Why welfare demands endless coercion. Let's pull back the curtain on something that touches every layer of our lives. Whether you're scraping by or grinding away in the middle, welfare. Not the surface-level story of compassion and safety nets, but the raw machinery of control that keeps the entire power pyramid humming along. We're going to unpack how this system doesn't just hand out resources. It manufactures endless dependencies for some, forces relentless extraction from others, and weaves humiliation, threats, and outright coercion into the fabric of society. All while propping up a hierarchy designed to divide and rule at every turn. Stick with me. This isn't about blame or quick fixes. It's about seeing the logic of how power really operates so we can think clearly about breaking free from it. Picture this for a second. What if the very programs sold as helping the vulnerable are actually the glue holding a massive control structure together? What if they create a permanent underclass hooked on entitlements while draining the productive layers through hidden robbery and intimidation? And what if this isn't accidental inefficiency, but the deliberate design of a system where elites at the top pull strings through finance, information, and even moral frameworks to keep everyone below in check? That's the teaser. By the end of this, you'll see welfare not as charity, but as the perfect tool embedded deep in the hierarchy. One that demands constant expansion, constant funding, and constant enforcement to survive. Before we continue, if this exploration of welfare and power resonates with you, consider liking, commenting, and sharing the episode while following for future releases. Alright, let's get into the real mechanics. At the very top sits Level 1, the elites who command the levers of finance, information, and religion, including its modern secular cousins like atheism and state-approved ideologies. These aren't separate forces. They're the foundation. Finance here means the ability to conjure currency out of thin air through central mechanisms and debt creation. That's what makes endless welfare possible without immediate collapse. You don't need to balance budgets when you can print or borrow into existence whatever deficits arise from ballooning entitlements. It funds the whole show indefinitely, eroding the value of what the middle layers have earned while masking the true cost. Information flows as surveillance, tracking every claim, every transaction, every bit of compliance data. So the system knows exactly who to nudge, who to punish, and who to keep dependent. And religion or its replacements. That's the moral glue. It frames redistribution as a sacred duty, guilt as a virtue, and questioning the system as selfish or immoral. Whether through old doctrines or new ones dressed up as social justice, it manipulates emotions and beliefs at the mass level, making people accept their role in the pyramid without revolt. This top level doesn't micromanage the streets. It controls the masses indirectly by directing Level 2, the institutions that shape the middle class, which in turn keeps the lower class in line. Governments, education, judiciary, media, corporations, military, culture, even organized crime and the scientific apparatus all serve as the enforcers and managers. And welfare? It's the golden thread running through every single one of them, turning abstract power into concrete daily control. Let's break it down layer by layer with pure logic. Start with government at the core of Level 2. Welfare isn't a side program. It's the primary way the state expands its bureaucracy into everyday life. Think about the endless paperwork, eligibility checks, recertifications, and behavioral conditions. Each form, each interview, each rule isn't inefficiency. It's deliberate humiliation and oppression. It drains life energy from recipients, forcing them into a cycle where they must prove their worthiness over and over, eroding dignity and autonomy. The logic is airtight. Once someone is entangled in these dependencies, exiting becomes irrational. Benefits phase out in ways that create sky-high effective tax rates on any extra earnings. Work a little more? Lose housing aid, medical support, food assistance. The math doesn't lie. Staying put often feels safer than climbing. This creates enforced dependencies that span generations. Kids grow up watching the system as provider, learning that the state, not personal effort or family or community, is the reliable source. Meanwhile, for the middle class footing the bill, government uses the judiciary and enforcement arms to intimidate and threaten. Audits, liens, wage garnishments, even jail for non-compliance. That's the robbery side. Progressive extraction through taxes and inflation isn't voluntary contribution. It's coercion backed by the monopoly on violence. The middle layers get squeezed to fund the lower, fostering resentment that divides society neatly into payers versus receivers. No unified pushback against the top when everyone's fighting over scraps. Education fits right in as the obedience trainer. It doesn't teach critical thinking about incentives or self-reliance. It instills rote acceptance of the welfare framework as normal, even noble. Young minds absorb the idea that the state owes provision and that questioning redistribution is heartless. This prepares both future recipients for dependency and future middle-class workers for their role as compliant funders. Culture steps up next, steering emotions and defining terms. Media and cultural output hammer home narratives of compassion for recipients while portraying payers as greedy or privileged. Language itself gets controlled, entitlements become rights, dependency becomes support, and any critique gets smeared as lacking empathy. This suppresses alternative thoughts and keeps the divide alive. Corporations play their part too, often thriving in crony arrangements where welfare stabilizes a compliant labor pool or subsidizes low wages indirectly. They combat real competition and health by aligning with the regulatory web that welfare expands. Need more bureaucracy to administer benefits? That means more rules, more overhead, more ways to keep the masses poor and distracted. The military sits as the backstop of violence when softer controls fail. Useless eaters, misfits, or anyone threatening the order can be managed through force if the welfare pacification breaks down. Crime? It's tolerated or even leveraged in pockets to keep certain areas poor, compliant, and in need of more state intervention. Whistleblowers or disruptors get neutralized under the cover of law and order. And science, or what passes for it in policy circles. It protects the status quo, churning out studies that justify more spending while framing critics as outliers. No discovery of natural laws here, just tools to smear alternatives and reinforce the narrative. Now zoom out and see the divide and rule brilliance. Welfare splits potential opposition perfectly. The lower class gets hooked on entitlements, their energy channeled into navigating the system rather than challenging the pyramid. Recipients face enforced dependencies, surveillance, conditions, the constant threat of cutoff, which humiliates and oppresses while binding them to the state as benefactor. The middle class, meanwhile, endures endless robbery through fiat-fueled taxation and inflation. Their life energy drains into funding it all, with intimidation via enforcement mechanisms keeping them compliant. Payers resent receivers. Receivers fear payers. No one looks up at level 1 pulling the strings. It's genius in its simplicity. Create scarcity and division below while elites print the money, shape the information, and preach the morality that justifies it. The logic of endlessness is inescapable. Entitlements grow because dependency is addictive, not just for people but for the system itself. More recipients mean more bureaucracy, more justification for taxes, more need for surveillance. Fiat finance at the top ensures it never stops. You can always create more currency to paper over the gaps. But that more comes from somewhere, the productive output of the middle and the suppressed potential of the lower. It's robbery disguised as fairness. And the humiliation is not a bug. Means testing, behavioral mandates, and invasive checks turn aid into a tool of control, reminding recipients they're wards of the state. For payers, the threat of audits or penalties enforces participation. Oppression through paperwork for one group, threats of violence for the other, all to maintain the flow. In historical context, when early welfare programs first emerged in the late 19th century, the thinking was explicit. One architect put it plainly. These measures would bribe the working classes, make them far easier to handle, and position the state as their social benefactor to neutralize radical threats. It wasn't about pure uplift. It was pacification to integrate potential troublemakers into the order. Fast forward, and the pattern holds. Welfare expands precisely when unrest brews, quelling the lower layers, then tightens to enforce labor discipline. The result? Intergenerational traps where dependency becomes normalized, family structures weaken under incentive distortions, and entire segments stay locked in compliance. Quotes from those early designs hammer it home. The goal was to regulate the poor, so they wouldn't disrupt the system, turning relief into a regulator of behavior rather than genuine independence. Another insight from the era: welfare as a way to prevent rebellion by offering just enough to stabilize, but never enough to empower real autonomy. These aren't isolated ideas. They're the logical outcome of a hierarchy that views people as resources to manage. The themes all circle back to power preservation. Welfare demands endless robbery because fiat enables it, but that robbery requires intimidation to extract. It breeds humiliation because bureaucracy enforces submission. It creates dependencies because incentives trap rational actors. And it divides because pitting groups against each other prevents them from questioning the elites above. Information surveillance tracks it all. Cultural narratives justify it. Education prepares minds for it. Every institution at level 2 serves the pyramid by wielding welfare as both carrot and stick. So where does this leave us? Not with despair, but with clarity. Seeing the structure for what it is, a self-reinforcing machine of control, is the first step toward rejecting it. Favor voluntary associations, free market exchanges, and personal sovereignty wherever possible. Build parallel systems of mutual aid that don't rely on the pyramid's coercion. Question the narratives, track the incentives, and refuse the division. The logic is on our side. True prosperity and dignity come from breaking dependencies, not feeding them. Real power flows from understanding the game, not playing it on their terms. Thanks for thinking through this with me. Keep questioning the foundations. Stay sharp out there. Stay free.